Hello again. This is Steve Turner. We're here at First United Methodist Church. I teach a Sunday school class here. It's called Koinonia. We meet every Sunday at 10 o'clock, and we welcome you. If you are looking for a Sunday school somewhere in town or in the church here, we would welcome your presence. One of the things that our Sunday school class has covered over the last several months has been the Screwtape Letters. And I have been the teacher of that. And so we've probably taken, 3 months to cover 31 letters. And our technique or our method or our approach is to do 3 letters at a lesson. So that's what we'll be doing today. We'll be doing 3 letters. Letter 16, 17, and 18. The letters are from Screwtape to Wormwood. Wormwood is a neophyte tempter, demon, and Screwtape is a seasoned veteran. Wormwood is the nephew of Screwtape, so Screwtape feels a responsibility for Wormwood, as Wormwood has his first human being to tempt and to succeed in winning this patient's soul. So the series of letters are advice from Screwtape to Wormwood about how to win this young man's soul. So we've done 15 letters. We've got about 16 letters to go, so let's go ahead and get started. As always, he begins his letters with the greeting, "My dear Wormwood." You mentioned casually in your last letter that the patient has continued to attend one church, and only one since he was converted, and that he is not wholly pleased with it. May I ask what you are about? Why I have no report on the causes of his fidelity to the parish church? Do you realize that unless it is due to indifference, it is a very bad thing? Surely you know that if a man can't be cured of church going, the next best thing is to send him all over the neighborhood looking for the church that suits him until he becomes a taster or a connoisseur of churches. The reasons are obvious. In the first place, the parochial organization should always be attacked because being a unity of place and not of likings, it brings people of different classes in psychology together in the kind of unity the enemy desires. The congregational principle, on the other hand, makes each church into a kind of club. And finally, if all goes well, into a coterie or faction. In the second place, the search for a suitable church makes the man a critic, where the enemy wants him to be a pupil. What he wants of the layman in a church is an attitude which may indeed be critical in the sense of rejecting what is false or unhelpful, but which is wholly uncritical in the sense that it does not appraise, does not waste time in thinking about what it rejects, but lays upon itself open in uncommenting, humble receptivity to any nourishment that is going. You see how groveling, how unspiritual, how irredeemably vulgar he, being God, is. This attitude, especially during sermons, creates the condition most hostile to our whole policy, in which platitudes can become really audible to a human soul. There's hardly any sermon or any book which may not be dangerous to us if it was received in this temper. So pray bestir yourself and send this fool the round of the neighboring churches as soon as possible. Your record up to date has not given us much satisfaction. So, Screwtape tells Wormwood going to church is bad, but if he's going to church, he needs to go to a lot of churches and never get a home. Never learn the names of the people in the church. Just go in the church, sit in the back, and then go to the next church. Always critiquing the service, the choir, the minister, the people around him. Why? Because then the patient will be the center of attention. The whole purpose of worship is what? Is to worship God. So who is the center of attention? Not me, not you, but God. And what brings us together? What unifies us? Our belief in God, and as Christians, in Christ, His Son. So when we come together as a church, we have a lot of differences. The best churches have the most differences. But those are human characteristics. The best churches are unified, even though there are many differences. What the devil wants to do is to separate the church into different factions. And we don't have to be very smart to see this over and over and over. And so he talks about there are two churches nearby. So why don't you start with those two? I've looked up in the office, both have certain claims. At the first of these, the vicar is a man who has been so long engaged in watering down the faith to make it easy for a supposedly incredulous and hard-headed congregation that is now he who shocks his parishioners with his unbelief, not vice versa. He has deserted both the lectionary and the appointed psalms, and now, without noticing it, revolves endlessly round the little treadmill of his 15 favorite psalms and 20 favorite lessons. The next church, at the other church, we have Friar Spike. The humans are often puzzled to understand the range of his opinions. Why he is one day almost a communist, the next day not far from some kind of theocratic fascist, one day a scholastic, the next prepared to deny human reason altogether, one day immersed in politics, and the day after declaring that all states of this world are equally under judgment. It is, of course, see the connecting link, which is hatred. But the problem with this church is, I must warn you, this person, this minister, Friar Spike, has one fatal defect. He really believes. And this may yet mar all. So, he says there is one good point with both of these churches have in common. They are both party churches. Now, he doesn't mean party like party, I'm going to a party. He means like parties, they've broken up into different parties, into different factions. And that's good, because when the patient goes to one of the churches, the different parties will try to convince the new member, the new person, to join their party. Whereas, in the perfect church, what happens? There is no party, it's one church. We're all joined together in our unified mission of pleasing God and being God's people in this town. So again, he ends this with, you would think they could not fail to see this application. You would expect to find the low churchman genuflecting and crossing himself, lest the weak conscience of his high brother should be moved to irreverence, and the high one refraining from these exercises, lest he should betray his low brother into idolatry. He's mentioning here, he's talking about what Paul says about the weaker brother or the stronger brother acquiescing to the weaker brother in issues of concern at churches. And so it would have been for our ceaseless labor, without our ceaseless labor. Without that, the variety of usage within the Church of England might have become a positive hotbed of charity and humility. So the thing that we as churches need to look out for is this devilish intent to divide us. And it could be politics. It could be anything. It can be anything. It can be material kinds of things, finances. It could be a certain kind of worship. It could be all kinds of things. What unifies us, though, is a belief in God and our commitment to Christ and our service to Christ. Let's go on to the next letter, which is kind of interesting because it's going to deal with gluttony, but not gluttony as we normally think of gluttony. So he starts the letter again, my dear Wormwood. The contemptuous way in which you spoke of gluttony as a means of catching souls in your last letter only shows your ignorance. One of the great achievements of the last 100 years has been to deaden the human conscience on that subject, so that by now you will hardly find a sermon preached or a conscience troubled about it in the whole length and breadth of Europe. This has largely been effected by concentrating all our efforts on gluttony of delicacy, not gluttony of excess. So, what does this mean for us today, 2021 in the United States? Gluttony. We think of gluttony generally as excessive eating. That's not what the devil is after. He's after the gluttony of delicacy. And so what is the gluttony of delicacy? Well, it's wanting a particular kind of food. It's wanting a specifically prepared food. It's, think of this, and I do this. I'm guilty of this. I have a favorite restaurant in the Golden Triangle that I'm very, I like it a lot. So I go there and I take my friends with me and I brag on the steaks that they cook and things like that. That's what he's talking about. Now, I don't send my steaks back if they're not cooked exactly the way I want them, but that's even more what he's talking about. He talks about the patient's mother. And really, one of her sins is gluttony. But she's one of these that her gluttony is saying, oh, that's all I want. So it's not excess, it's delicacy. And she says, but she never finds any servant or friend who can do these things properly. All she wants is a cup of tea properly made, or an egg properly boiled, or a slice of bread properly toasted. She never finds any servant or friend who can do these simple things properly, because her properly conceals an insatiable demand for the exact and almost impossible palatial pleasures which she imagines she remembers from the past. A past described by her as the days when you could get good servants. I think we've all heard this. Boy, they don't make like they used to. They don't. And have you seen the price of these things today? My goodness, why can't we have a Coke for a nickel like we used to? So again, we don't think of gluttony, like he says. I can't remember when I've heard a sermon on gluttony in the last decade, because we don't deal with usually excess. But, one of the things we have here in America is we do have a problem with food. And we do have a lot of hungry people in one of the richest nations on the earth. So again, what does that imply about us as a people? Well, I think it says a lot about who we are, and it says a lot about us as a society, because that's a fundamental need, a fundamental thing that all of us need is food. Now, the church, I must admit, the church here and around the world, one of its major missions is providing food, and that's very appropriate. So again, he brings up this idea to Wormwood. You said gluttony's not an issue, but you're losing this patient when he is very vulnerable to the gluttony of delicacy. So go after that. Go after that in a big way. He closes here and he says, mere excess in food is much less valuable than delicacy. Its chief use is as a kind of artillery preparation for attacks on chastity. On that, as on every other subject, Keep your man in a condition of false spirituality. Never let him notice the medical aspect. Keep him wondering what pride or lack of faith has delivered him into your hands when a simple inquiry into what he has been eating or drinking for the last 24 hours would show him whence his ammunition comes, and thus enable him, by a very little abstinence, to imperil your lines of communication. We've mentioned the discipline of fasting. One of the purposes of fasting is make us aware of our eating, and make us aware of the gift of food, make us aware of our need for food, but also make us aware that without food we are dependent on God as we are with food. And again, that's a discipline we don't hear about a whole lot. So we're going to close today with the last letter, and this would be letter 18. Even under slubgob, you must have learned at college the routine technique of sexual temptation. And since for us spirit, this whole subject is one of considerable tedium, though necessary as part of our training, I will pass it over. But on the larger issues involved, I think you have a good deal to learn. The enemy's demand on humans takes the form of a dilemma, either complete abstinence or unmitigated monogamy. Ever since our father's first great victory, we have rendered the former very difficult, abstinence. The latter, for the last few centuries, we've been closing up as a way of escape. We've done this through the poets and novelists by persuading the humans that a curious and usually short-lived experience, which they call being in love, is the only respectable ground for marriage, that marriage can and ought to render this excitement permanent, and that a marriage which does not do so is no longer binding. This idea is our parody of an idea that came from the enemy. The whole philosophy of hell rests on recognition of the axiom that one thing is not another thing, and specifically, that oneself is not another self. My good is your good, my good is my good, and yours is yours. What one gains, another loses. Even an inanimate object is what it is by excluding all other objects from the space it occupies. If it expands, it does so by thrusting out other objects or by absorbing them. A self does the same. With beasts, the absorption takes the form of eating. For us, it means the sucking of will and freedom out of a weaker self into a stronger. To be means to be in competition. Now, he talks about this, and he's going to use competition to the devil's benefit. Again, I saw a tag the other day on a truck that I think it said second equals last, or two. It was, you only have 6 letters on a tag, so it had to be, I enjoy reading these tags because they have to be very succinct what the intent is here. But I think the intent of this tag was to tell whoever was looking at the tag that second place is equal to last place, which is not mathematically true. Second place comes after 1. But in the mind of the tag bearer, there's no difference between second and last. So what does that imply? Well, if you can't be first, maybe don't even play. But again, this is different in how God sees the world. What does God want from us in church and as a group of Christians? Does he want us to compete against each other? No, I think he wants us to cooperate with each other and become one with each other. Now, I'm often warned not to use sports analogy, but I'm going to use one here because usually in a team sport, the team that is unified and plays together and understands each other and even accepts the mistakes that are bound to happen in a game and encourages that person who made the mistakes, usually, not always, usually that team does and performs better. Now, why is that the case? Well, they have subverted their personal goals, so to speak. They still have personal goals, but they have subverted them into a team goal. And we recently saw this with our baseball team. They won the national championship, if you haven't heard. They won the NCAA National College World Series. And if you watch them play, of course they made mistakes, but they had a focus on what their true goal was, which was to stay in the game, play one more inning, get one more hit, get one more out if you're a pitcher, and so on and so on. And so the theme here is God wants us to play ball, so to speak, with each other and for each other. The devil wants us to play ball for ourselves and damn the team, okay? And if he can get us to think that way, then he has won our soul. I'm going to end with that, and thank you again for sharing this time with us here at First United Methodist, and we will continue our study of the Screwtape Letters in our next session. Thank you very much.